we view service as servitude. We view it as a base level occupation, and it shouldn't be, because everywhere else in the world you make a living doing that. So why don't we apply that to the same standard to what we have in America? We got more than enough money to do it, and we got more than enough people to do it. Let's try it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to your Daily Detroit. It's Wednesday, July 31st, 2024. I am Jer Stays, coming to you from the studio at Techtown for your Daily Detroit. And joining me to my left, well, I can't think of anyone else better to talk about these topics with. Norris Howard, how are you?
What's going on, man? We are back one more time. News fresh off the presses, coming out of Lansing, that we got to talk about. Big stuff.
We're literally scrapping our whole previous show.
Yep.
And we're got to talk about this because the Michigan Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that the adopt and amend tactics used by the legislature to change ballot initiatives regarding minimum wage and paid sick leave were unconstitutional. The decision means that wage increases and more generous leave requirements, as called for by the 2018 initiative that was passed by Michigan voters, will take effect in February. What are the brass tacks, and why do we move this to the front of the line? It's because the minimum wage will rise from $10.33 to over $12 an hour on February 21st of next year, with further increases tied to inflation. The tipped wage is currently just under $4 an hour, will be gradually phased out by 2029. There'll also be additional mandatory paid leave at bigger employers. That will move from like 40 to 72 hours, and smaller employers will no longer be exempt from providing paid sick leave. This is huge because this changes the restaurant industry. It will have major implications for a lot of places over the next couple of years. Business groups are having a lot of concerns around this. Restaurants specifically, they're the group that was behind the petition, One Fair Wage, organized the ballot drive and praised the decision, highlighting the benefits for workers, especially those in the restaurant industry. House Republicans, who are in the minority in the state, are already calling for legislative action. The lobbying group, or one lobbying group for restaurants, the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association, says 40% of Michigan full-service restaurants are unprofitable, and they fear that this decision will be part of 1 in 5 restaurants closing. Others argue, well, you should pay people a minimum wage. This is huge and ties into a whole bunch of topics we talk about all the time on Daily Detroit.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest ones is equitable pay. This is something that the people of Michigan voted for. This is not a Detroit specific thing. This is something that won statewide all the way back in, what was it, 2018. And, it was stifled in legislative hell. It eventually reached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld the will of the people. They said, listen, this is what was voted on. And so this is what will be.
The restaurant industry, let's be honest, and there are a number of stories that tie into this. They're going through it right now, but they're going through it for a number of reasons, not just the wage thing.
No, and I think one of the big things that we're going to see is, yes, there is going to be some contraction of the full service restaurant business. We just got to be honest about that.
I think we were already going to have that, though.
But I agree. We were going to have that regardless. But I think when we're talking about specifically in our city centers, it may not impact as much as I think it will. That's just my personal opinion. I think we'll see maybe 1 or 2 businesses close. I don't think it will be this massive closure of restaurants that we could potentially see. I think it will impact mostly a lot of mid-Michigan restaurants, smaller cities, smaller towns maybe. But ultimately, I think when we're looking at this, yeah, there's going to be probably less staff at those restaurants, but they will still function and they will still be open.
But there is that argument. There are a number of restaurant workers that prefer a mostly tipped wage because they feel like they can make a lot more money that way.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of people who would just prefer to have the guaranteed money in the bank, right? And then, especially,
couldn't you do both?
Listen, I mean, if you want to tip somebody, you can still tip somebody. But what I think is going to happen, or at least what I think we're going to see a lot more of, is a lot of the automation coming into the restaurant business. But those who still work at restaurants may end up having just a higher quality of life. You're going to have more money guaranteed. You're going to have more time off work that's going to be paid sick leave or paid, not family leave, because that was not specified, but you're going to get more time off. And ultimately, you're going to be walking home with a larger paycheck.
So that gets to the question of if a business can't survive by paying a decent wage to its employees, should it survive?
Open?
Should it be open?
No.
Okay.
That is just my firm feeling. I think we're entering an era in sort of the American worker, American class conversation that we need to have, in which, there's already huge inflation. There's already, a lot of people with less disposable income. If you're going to these restaurants and you're spending X amount of dollars, that money should be going to the people making that restaurant run.
Well, and when I talk about the minimum wage to people, because there's the idea of, getting us to a $15 minimum wage.
Right.
A lot of business owners I know candidly just say, I'm already paying that. Like, why not just pull the floor up there? Because in all seriousness, that you have to pay that in order to be able to get like any kind of halfway decent talent, because the restaurant business is so hard. Hospitality is really difficult. If you can make more, it's part of the shift. One thing that I talked about, I think with another contributor, Mickey Lyons, when she was here, is that like the cannabis industry has kind of grabbed some of people who are working in hospitality. Why? Regular hours, you get to go home earlier.
You make a decent wage.
That whole thing. I know that there's a lot of people who want later open restaurants, but there's a lot of workers who don't want later open restaurants. There's like a tension in that, There
is. And I think you bring up a really great point talking about some of the restaurants that tend to be successful are the ones already paying above minimum wage or already paying at that $15 hour wage.
Or they're a fast casual place where they're not making most of their money off of tips. They're more working the line.
Exactly. And, at the end of the day, those restaurants will not be affected by this. If you're already paying $15 an hour, you're not losing one employee from this. And you're also not being strapped for cash by this. It's the restaurants that are trying to play those margins so finely and so thinly that are going to feel the heat. And so I think when we're talking about the restaurants in your Grand Rapidses and your Detroits and Royal Oaks that already are paying above minimum wage for the talent that they have, those restaurants are still going to be around. So I don't necessarily see this as something that will destroy the Michigan or Metro Detroit restaurant community. I could be wrong. I'm not a restaurateur.
But storms are there. Like there are other storms going on because it seems like some of the shifts with going to restaurants and going out with the pandemic have stuck. Like it's not we're all in our houses all the time, but it's definitely a lot harder to get people out nowadays.
I mean, it is, but also at the same time, a lot of that is because of just the rising costs of goods. You go out to the restaurant and you see a dish that normally would be $20 that's now $32.
And they're getting squeezed by cost of goods too.
Absolutely.
Because ingredients are going up. And another thing that I've noticed is more people are going out for special occasions. When I've done reporting before with downtown Detroit restaurants, a lot of people see more traffic on the weekends now instead of during the week. You have more people staying closer to home during the week for that kind of stuff. Absolutely.
And I just think also, looking at restaurants, I myself is somebody who probably eats out way more than I should. I honestly think, carry out is the bane of a restaurant's existence. Like I understand why you have to do it and I get it, but if I got the choice to go in and sit down, I'll go in and sit down, man. Like it feels like in order to be more, and this is opinion, this is not based in fact. I'm not saying that like let's change our entire culture. But for me, as somebody that enjoys to support restaurants and enjoys going out, like maybe the shift needs to be in the consumer, and that I don't want to go to a restaurant and just grab a styrofoam bag. Like, let's get back to experience dining. Maybe that has to be the thought.
So I think that some people have, but on the luxury side, I think it's the middle that's getting destroyed in the middle. Like I'm thinking about, I went to the Clarissa Shields fight. Mm-hmm. So much fun. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
She is great. Fight. But Walk by Basan, I haven't been there yet. Devin's, everyone but me has been.
Yeah.
But that's going to be a sit down, amazing.
I'm going there tonight.
I'm so mad at you. It's that sit down experience that's special. There is still room for that. Your Grey Ghosts, you name it, right? But that middle, Applebee's, Olive Garden, etc., is getting erased. But then on the other hand, you have places that are really focused on to go. So you always see that Detroit 75 kitchen guy on Instagram.
Absolutely.
He's nailing it, but he's also never open on weekends. But because that's his thing, he's like, I want to pay a higher wage. I don't want to be open on weekends for my employers. He knows what his restaurant does and he sticks to it. He's found a ton of success.
I will ask the question then. and this is going to be a tough question to answer, is that a bad thing if Applebee's disappears? Is that the worst thing in the world?
But like, I love a corner diner like Christine's Cuisine in Ferndale.
That's what we got the corner. That's what we got the Coney for. But you just talked about a small diner. You talked about a small.
But they're always busy. I think they're going to be fine.
No, but you talked about a small business. Is that something we need to rethink? Should we be going back to the small business neighborhood restaurant where you know the people who own it, right? As opposed to going to these massive chains that, let's be honest, will be responsible for a lot of these closures. Why wouldn't it be nice to see those restaurants that are massive chains replaced by small businesses or replaced by regional diners that actually understand the culture and provide a product that people actually want?
You also see a rise of not the chain, but the restaurant group.
Yes.
Where there's a kind of a, I know people hate it when I say this, but curated experience.
Yeah.
And maybe there's
Freya Dragonfly combination thing, you know.
Or there's maybe 15 restaurants under the umbrella, but each one has, like, they share costs and buying and things, but each restaurant has a personality to it.
But why not? That sounds fantastic to me.
This also gets into this bigger question that should service jobs be able to provide more of a living wage? Because at the end of the day, we are shifting with manufacturing. Manufacturing, we just don't need as many people to manufacture stuff anymore. Those old photos of, what's now the Russell Industrial Center or the Packard plant or the old Model T factory in Highland, that world is never coming back to America.
It's never coming back.
We may bring manufacturing back, but that's going to be a bachelor degree held job or a specialty certificate held job, and it's going to be a clean floor with robots.
It's going to be a skilled trade. It's going to be a skilled trade. And here's the thing, is that you talk about service-based industries becoming more, having more livable wages. Anybody who's ever been to a place like London or Paris, that's what you do. Like, if you're a server in Paris, that is your career, and you make a living doing that, and you can become an expert at it and then move up the chain, eventually becoming a maître d' or all sorts of things. There is a career pathway in the service industry. We don't view it that way in America. We view service as servitude. We view it as a base level occupation, and it shouldn't be, because everywhere else in the world, you make a living doing that. So why don't we apply that to the same standard to what we have in America? We got more than enough money to do it, and we got more than enough people to do it. Let's try it.
I'm going to leave that there, but I want to hear your feedback. dailydetroit@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you about this topic. Before we go, Norris Howard, we did not get a chance to talk about the whole everything political scene last week with talking about the Algiers Motel, which I think was great that we did.
Yeah.
And an important story to share. But you didn't get your chance to take a swing at the news of the vice presidential change, and since then, some new polling. So this new polling came out, Bloomberg poll that shared in Reuters, an 11-point lead for Vice President Kamala Harris. That's coupled with WDIV's poll, the Detroit News poll, where Trump got 0% of the black vote in a smaller sample. And we talked a little bit about it with Steve Freese, but what say you, Norris Howard? Because I sense a shift, and also, let's just be honest, you've got a different perspective that I think is valuable.
It's something I've been saying for a very long time when it comes to not just polling, but the political discourse in general. I've been very vocal in saying if there was going to be a change from Joe Biden, the only person it could be is Kamala Harris, because her name is on the ticket. The funding can go to her. The money that's already been raised can go to her, so on and so forth. So anybody else that was not a realistic option. It wasn't a realistic option. She was the option. So now here we are, and we're in a situation in which we see a new energy being injected into the Democratic Party and Democratic voters. And everybody talked about how there needed to be a shift, there needed to be a change, and Joe Biden could lose this and that and the third. Let me tell you something. There are very few people more qualified than a person like her. This is not an endorsement. This is not an opinion. This is talking about raw fact. If you say, who should be a person that leads our country? And if you list off her resume, I fail to see why how anybody else is more qualified. That is a part of why you see the energy behind her, because I think it is tough. It was tough for her to beat other Democrats. I think it was going to be tough for her to beat other liberals. There are other people who are more fiery. There are other people who are more known as brands.
There's a lot of people that are more liberal, to be very honest.
Incorrect. I will push back on that. Incorrect. If you look at her voting record in the Senate, only Bernie Sanders is more liberal than she is. She is in the 98th percentile for progressivism in the Senate. She is by far one of the most progressive people that we have in the political discourse. But because she has this Kamala cop BS that was put forth that has honestly not a lot of basis in fact when you look at how many convictions.
But some of her policies are a bit more moderate, especially when you come to foreign policy.
I mean, but what is her record and what is the rhetoric? That's what I would pose to voters. And I think what you're seeing with the new energy behind her is you're starting to see a lot of deconstruction of some of the sort of mythos built around Kamala Harris. I think, when you talk about the sort of moderate nature of a lot of that is being deconstructed in real time as we begin to see as her candidacy has begun to move forward. And I think, or her potential candidacy, because the convention is not has not selected her officially yet. But I think the energy and the stuff that you're seeing around her is directly related to a lot of that stuff. And I think the Democratic Party has actually done a pretty great job and an interesting job at positioning her as somebody that is the antithesis to everything that the GOP stands for, which is a candidate that I think the Democratic Party and Democrats in the country have been looking for. So I find this to be quite the masterstroke from Democrats. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion by any stretch of the imagination. I think polls are polls. I think, we have not seen an accurate poll, I think, since Bush Clinton. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how people actually vote. But I will say this is that 2022 to me is a much better indicator of where we are politically as a state, in Michigan specifically. College girls and college educated white women, they have flipped.
Mm-hmm.
They have gone towards the Democratic Party over Roe v. Wade. And those people didn't disappear. Those women didn't go anywhere. Those women haven't all of a sudden changed their entire political stance because Donald Trump is back in the mix.
This really tells me that the candidate matters so much.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't have a changing candidate, you don't have this energy. People need to rally behind people. Leadership matters. Who's in charge matters. You don't get tracks from Beyonce
No.
with Joe Biden.
No, you don't.
You don't. You don't get so many celebrities lining up, and I have seen a number of posts on social media from, more right-wing voices going, hey, we need to get our stuff together.
Well,
because we're going to get walloped because so many people are underestimating her.
It's not even just an underestimation of her. It's an underestimation of what she represents. She's not just a black woman. She's a mixed woman. She's gone to a HBCU. She's she's the first female vice president in history. What she represents is something a lot larger than anything the GOP has put up. And people understand that. I think the electorate understands that. They see an opportunity to make history again. And that's something that I think is lost upon a lot of sort of more moderate, middle of the road and conservative voters.
Some of my fellow media creators may not love this, but I'm kind of loving the 100-day election cycle. I feel like it's a lot more energetic than the dragged on whatever. I mean, I know we're one of the few countries in the world who does it this way, but I really like this more focused format for this instead of years and years of blah,
I would
blah,
love
blah,
it.
blah, blah.
I would love it if political campaigns and political discourse was absolutely banned until the last 100 days, because it is a very concentrated, very concerted effort, and it's streamlined everything. It's forced both parties actually to really focus in on what it is they need to be talking about. Unfortunately, for the GOP, that focus was Joe Biden, and now he ain't a factor. So now they got to rebuild their entire apparatus, and they don't have enough time to do it.
And not only that, but they're they're going on policies that are, whatever you think about them, they're unpopular. The stuff around Roe v. Wade is unpopular. You look at those states that are red. Those are unpopular policies. Like, there's a bunch of these things that, like, if you take away like the personal aspect of it, you don't have a majority coalition of people who think the same way you do. I mean, that's just the reality.
Yeah, and I know we're talking like we feel like this is a foregone conclusion,
And it's
which
not.
it is not. It is not. People still got to get up and go to the polls. All the fluff and tweets and posts on threads and all that mean nothing. The only thing that matters is votes. But I think you'd be silly not to recognize the difference in energy here. And I think the Democratic Party have hit on something in recognizing that Kamala is a good candidate specifically against Donald Trump.
Let's end with your comments about the 0%, zero respondents in that poll for black voters for Trump.
Listen, this is what I've always said. Everybody get off Twitter, go talk to real people, right? I know that you see a lot of sort of, black male content creators or perhaps even some Russian bots posting a lot of anti-Kamala stuff, posting pro-Trump stuff. Listen, the electorate is what it is. And if we're talking about the city of Detroit, a city that is between 95 and 98% Democratic, come on. Like, let's be realistic here.
And if you play back the tape, the percentages really have not changed over a number of election cycles.
In 25 years, in my lifetime, it's been that. And like in my entire voting lifetime, it's been that way. And so seeing 0% for Donald Trump, especially post Kamala, is not shocking, because for black folks, Joe Biden might have been a begrudging vote. The people that I talked, it was a begrudging vote. Yeah, we'll vote for him because he's not Trump. Right.
And there's some people that do have a lot of support for him in especially like the older community.
Yeah.
Because he has done some stuff in the city of Detroit that a lot of people have paid attention to.
Have enjoyed. And I've even talked to, some of the rappers that went to the rally that Trump had. I've personally spoken to some of them that went, and they had a lot of poignant points. They said, listen, the Trump campaign called me. The Democrats have not reached out to me at all to talk to my community. And you know what? I think that is a miscalculation on the Democrats. This is me being honest. However, I think with the addition of Kamala Harris as the potential nominee or heir apparent, whatever we want to call her, that has brought forth a side of the Democratic Party that we have not seen since Obama, and that is the energy from the black community, period. Black folks put Joe Biden there, but I think that was a means to an end. This is real energy you're seeing, real energy. And that is something that I don't think can be replicated, and it is very much so the anti-energy to MAGA, and this is going to be a very, very interesting next 90 or so days.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. dailydetroit@gmail.com. Would love to hear your feedback. Episodes like these are brought to you by our members on Patreon, patreon.com/dailydetroit. Local media requires local support to survive. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Norris Howard.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk tomorrow.